Hello and a warm welcome to this new course. This course is about Chinrezig practice, and it's about Chinrezig as the ultimate, most wonderful practice, which in itself is the union of Mahamudra and of Mahasandhi, which most people call Dzogchen. But if we keep both names in Sanskrit, Mahamudra, Mahasandhi. If we keep them both in Tibetan, Chagchen, Dzogchen. But anyway, whatever we call them, this is about Chinrezig being the highest union of those. I'm very, very happy to present it. And it is one of the highest, deepest, but at the same time, most simple and practical of teachings. It, of course, belongs to our Bodhisattva path, the very special aspect of our Bodhisattva path, which is Vajrayana practice. The very top of Vajrayana practice is Mahamudra in our Kagyu lineage, Dzogchen in the Nyingma lineages. So this is the highest, yes, the zenith of Bodhisattva practice. So let's start with some serious Bodhisattva prayers and beautiful, beautiful Bodhisattva motivation. Really remembering that we are supposed to be creatures of love, of great, pure love for all our fellow beings. And so we try our very, very best to feel, to remember, to conjure up whatever loving care we can manage, remembering just that we are one tiny part, but a very important part of an endless universe of minds, and that so many of those minds are confused and in suffering, and we can bring some light and some liberation into that. So we take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the community of most noble minds. From this moment on until we reach the very heart of enlightenment, through our practice of generosity and all 6 transcendent virtues, may we reach total awakening and every enlightened quality, to be able to truly help sentient beings who are so lost in samsara. May each and every one of those beings be well. May they live long and be healthy. May they be well provided for, have good friends, find respect, and live in places of peace, places of plenty, and most of all, may they practice Dharma. May they each create the causes for those good circumstances to be their wealth in future lives. May they be freed from suffering and from creating any causes of future suffering. May they discover the natural, sacred well-being totally beyond suffering and attain the great equanimity that's free of closeness or distance from anyone. Dayata Shama Shamawati Shamita Shadru Amkure Marajite Karote Keyore Tejuwati Oloyani Peshuda Nimale Malapanaye Kukure Kaka Grase Grasana Omuki Paramuki Amuki Shamidavani Sawa Graha Bandanane Negri Itva Sawa Bhava Prawadina Vimukta Marapasha Savidva Buddha Mudra Anudgatita Sava Mare Putsarita Parishude Piga Shantu Sava Marakama. Glorious Guru, source of all blessing ever present above our head on lotus and moon seat, through your immense kindness, ever sustain us, that the accomplishments of body, speech, and mind flow from you, and we are one. So we must start the course by zooming in. That's how it works, usually with Dharma teaching. So in all of the vastness of the Buddha's teachings, where are we? Well, as I mentioned just now before the prayers, we're at the very top. So the Buddha's teachings fall into two main categories, which are Sutra and Tantra. The word Sutra covers anything that can be taught with words and thought about in its general sense. It's not the Tripitaka, the three baskets, where you've got Sutra, Vinaya, Abhidharma, the three main areas of Buddha's teaching. Sutra, much more generally. It's what the Buddha taught that we can talk about, and I can teach, and anyone can teach. Tantra is basically practice. It's all about practicing the different tantras, different level of tantras. And within Tantra, it gets a bit complicated, you have a sutra level of Tantra, which is what you can say and talk about and teach about Tantra. And then the actual practice, which of course is secret usually. It needs empowerment, it needs explanation, it needs scriptural transmission. And the main point is you just do the practice and the practice works. And it connects you with your guru. So here we're in a way, the sutra level of Tantra that's being taught by a master of the 17th century, so 400 years ago, 400 years ago, and through what we call a Shastra. So another way of looking at it is there is Sutra and Shastra. Sutra is what the Buddha himself said, the Buddha's words. And then Shastra, after the Buddha was gone, it's what all the later masters taught, explaining the Buddha's words, unpacking them, giving examples. And then the Buddha taught, in 45 years of wandering, according to people's needs and questions. So when that's all put together, we can look more generally. What did he teach in all those years about karma, about shunyata, about compassion, and so on? And so the Shastras gather together information, they explain it, they help make it clear to us. And we have the wealth of the Shastras from 2,500 years of Buddhist masters helping us. So here we're looking at a text from a Buddhist master called Karma Chamé, who was one of Tibet's most remarkable teachers. So, and it's a text, that we'll plunge into in detail, but let's look in general about Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara, and Tibet, and Karma Chamé himself, because normally we need to look generally at the nature and the benefits of the teaching that we're following, and then the qualities of the master who teaches it. So if this was a thorough course, then there's a lot of blah, blah, blah you can give about that, and where this, the context where this text and this teaching fits. I try and give you some essential points, but in the traditional teaching, then it can be unpacked a lot, and very beautifully too. The teachings on this text I received from a master called Dumo Chuji Rinpoche, still alive, and he is the 18th Dumo Chuji Rinpoche, so that's a very big number in Tibetan terms. We've got the 17th Karmapa, and the first Dumo Chuji was a contemporary of Gampopa, disciple of Gampopa, and the present one lives in Tibet, in Damkar Monastery. At first he was a yogi meditating in a cave, and then one day from the cave on the hills far away opposite, he saw a lighter patch of land, lighter coloured, and he had a vision, a very powerful vision, that he should leave retreat and build a monastery there. So that white patch of land was white clay, which in Tibetan is Damkar. So he built Damkar Monastery. And I had the pleasure of seeing him and being with him. Wonderful, wonderful teacher in Damkar Monastery in Tibet. And then later on, Akon Rinpoche brought him to Samiling, and he taught this text in Samiling at Akon Rinpoche's request. And so I was his interpreter at that time and received transmission of it, for which I was very pleased, because it's a text I'm very fond of. I think it says something very essential. And for those of you who've been with me quite regularly on these Saturday mornings, you'll see, I hope, how we kind of followed a progression from a year of Buddha nature teachings and then into their expression by great Mahasiddhas as Dohas. And now we're looking at a Tibetan Mahasiddha, not an Indian Mahasiddha, and somebody who'd reached the top of the Nimapa system, so attained Dzogchen, and reached the top of the Kaju system, attained Mahamudra, saw that they both led to the same thing, different methods leading to the same Buddha nature, of course. That's where we all end up. And then he teaches that through the Chenrezig practice here. So this is a text about Chenrezig practice. It's not actually an instruction text how to do the Chenrezig practice. It is in a way, but it's not like we did sometime a few years ago, where we actually went through Tantong Jalpo's Chenrezig, the four-arm Chenrezig most people do, actually saying first you visualize this, then you do that, the 6 main steps. So this isn't a practice instruction in that sense, but it's a wonderful instruction about Chenrezig practice. So in the YouTube teachings, if you're interested, there are some sessions on me teaching how to do Chenrezig practice. And if you're not sure, then you might want to refer to those and go back to them. So, okay, that's kind of very general. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about, well, let's go into the words. In Tibetan, Chenrezig. Chenrezig at the end, but not Chenrezig. So most people, or if you do look on the internet, most things about the Tibetan word for what we're talking about end with a G, which doesn't make any sense. You see, the Tibetan, you can either transliterate it so you can see which letters appear in Tibetan, so you know how the Tibetans spell it. That's called transliteration. Or you can put what it sounds like, which most people call phonetics, but it's not phonetics, because phonetics are those funny symbols that very few people know. But if you go to Wikipedia, then you'll see the first thing they show you is how this is pronounced in International Phonetics. So this is the transliteration. Spyanrasgzigs, right? That's the letters in Tibetan, but it's pronounced Chenrezig, as though it's got a K on the end. So I always spell it with a K because that's what it sounds like. Chenrezig is the Tibetan translation of Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara means the one who sees the sufferings of the world. So in Tibetan, Chen means eyes. Rezik means seeing everything. It's like all-seeing eyes is the name of Chenrezig. The very early Chenrezig texts were translated into Chinese, and there were some errors of translation, and so at first it didn't know whether it meant all-seeing eyes or all-hearing ears. Right? Just one variation, one letter change, and it goes from who sees all the suffering of the world to the one who hears all the cries of suffering of the world. And in one sutra, they ask Chenrezig, how did you get enlightened? And he said it was through, out of the five senses, the hearing sense. And it's through taking mindfulness of hearing all the way through to the end that Chenrezig was liberated. So in the Chinese sutras, this all hearing becomes important. In Chinese, then Chenrezig or Avalokiteshvara becomes Kuan Yin, and Kuan Yin is often represented female, in Tibetan male. So we're looking at Avalokiteshvara, which is one name in Sanskrit. Another name is Mahakarunika. Karuna is compassion, Maha is great, so the great compassionate one. So anyway, I think what most Tibetan masters would say at the beginning of a course like this is how important Chenrezig has been, still is, in Tibet. And so some of them say, even before they can speak communicative language, children know how to do Om Mani Padme Hum because they've been with their parents who would everywhere do it. Even farmers, nomads, everyone in the evening, they do their prayers together as a family, and they'd be doing Om Mani Padme Hum. So the baby would hear and recite Om Mani Padme Hum before they even knew how to say, I want my porridge, or whatever communicative language we use. Chenrezig is everywhere in Tibet, and so even under Chinese occupation, people are still carving Om Mani Padme Hum, Chenrezig's mantra, in huge letters on rocks, in rivers. There is a Mani wall that Akon Rinpoche was involved with, a very high part of Tibet. I've been there. And that goes back to Patrul Rinpoche, who had a vision that if one built a wall of Mani stones, so each stone is carved with Om Mani Padme Hum, or sometimes Om Mani Padme Hum and a Buddha image, that if there was a whole wall going from where he was standing to a far distant place about 1 kilometer away, it would greatly benefit the world. So people started building that wall, and then Akon Rinpoche was involved with the Lama who was restoring it. So in 2000, it was progressing very, very well. It's almost 1 kilometer long, very high. You can't see over the top. It's much higher than a human being. So you walk around it. You do kora. You circumambulate the wall. So Om Mani Padme Hum and Chenrezig practice is everywhere, has been everywhere in Tibet. It's very, very important. So when we go back, I don't want to bore you too much with history, but history is very important. The very first of the great Tibetan kings was called Sonsen Gampo. He lived in the 7th century, so that's the 600s. So this is before Guru Rinpoche brought Dharma to Tibet. It's before the building of Samye Monastery. It's in the century before. There was a Tibetan king called Songtsen Gampo. Quite interestingly, in a long life prayer for the first Akon Rinpoche, written by the previous Trungpa Rinpoche, it's a long life prayer based on Akon Rinpoche's, on 100 of his previous incarnations. So there's a couple of words about each incarnation. So it's more or less saying, you who were this one, please live long, basically. So there's the 100 previous lives of Akon. And in one of them it says he was Songtsen Gampo, which you could make a lot of sense out of in many ways. But anyway, Sonsen Gampo, like the later Indian king Ashoka, was someone who in the first part of his life was a warrior king. And he was the first person to unify Tibet, but not only that, under him and his armies, Tibet took over much of what we call China these days and the Himalayan region. It was the Tibetan Empire, was huge, the hugest it's ever been, with a lot of power, a lot of money. Then the second part of his life, he turned to Dharma, and he did the most amazing things. He sent ministers to get an alphabet, sent them to India to get an alphabet and a grammar for the Tibetan language. He himself was an emanation of Manjusri, and there are stories of him receiving space teachings and so on. He sent medical missionaries. He made the first conference. He brought doctors from as far away as Greece, Russia, Persia, China, India, Ayurvedics, had to set up a 2-year conference so they could get the best medical system for Tibet, and tried his hardest to establish Buddhism against a lot of shamanistic opposition from the Pampo faith. So he was the first one to introduce the reciting of Om Mani Padme Hum into Tibet. And the main volume of scriptures about Chenrezig and Om Mani Padme Hum practice is called the Mani Kabum. Kabum means like 100,000 verses. It's like 100,000 songs of Milarepa. There aren't 100,000, but there's lots of teachings about Chenrezig and the Om Mani Padme Hum. And the first major contributor to that was King Sonsen Gampo. So from Tibet's very first Dharma beginnings in the 7th century, the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra and Chenrezig practice has been there. So that's one point, the importance of Om Mani Padme Hum for Tibet. But then, now this is the curious thing, and this is the whole point of this text, is that some, how can you say, not so wise. I mean, if we look, you can be very wise, like wise as the Buddha, or wise as our very, very best lamas, like Karmapa, Taisitupa, and so on, Dalai Lama. Some not so wise lamas think of Chenrezig practice as kind of beginner stuff, lay people's stuff, the lay person with the prayer wheel, looking like a helicopter about to take off. And they go around, oh, man, about more, man, about more, man, about more, man, about more. And even when you're talking to them, they're listening to you, but you can see in the back of their head, they're doing, oh, man, about more, man, about more, listening to some Ken rabbiting on. They're kind of in there all the time. Or Padme Hum practice. Many lamas think of it as beginner stuff, lay people's practice. But how can you say the real powerful stuff, the juicy stuff? That's in tantric practice, it's in retreat, it's in the inner yoga and Tummo practice, and all of that. And so they can be a bit snobby about Chinrezig practice. But like I say, they're not the wisest. Here in this text, we have one of Tibet's greatest masters ever, who'd done something very wonderful. He'd gone to the end, or the top, whichever way you look at it, of two separate traditions, and he could say they end up the same thing. Now, lots of people say about religions, oh, well, in the end, they all lead to the same thing. How do they know? Have they followed all the different religions up to the end? So they can say, yeah, I've done them all. Oh, yeah, I've been a Christian, been a Buddhist, did some Islam, a Sufi for a while. They all end up the same. But the only person who can really say they all lead to the same end is someone who's followed this one to the end, whatever it is, and that one to the end. Oh, it's the same end. Then they can at least affirm that from stable realization and experience. But otherwise it's wishful thinking, and not all spiritual paths need end up at the same place. Here, every so often, they get Jehovah's Witnesses come knocking at the door on Sunday. And, will what they believe, has that ever taken any Jehovah's Witness to Mahasiddha state or to recognition of Buddha nature and so on? Can it? If you just believe their version of the Bible, which is basically what they push. So it's a nice belief, and it kind of echoes the fact that inside we believe in Buddha nature, inside everybody. But the fact that each spiritual path that's appeared on earth will end up there is wishful thinking. So it's very amazing when somebody has followed two paths through to the end and who is a recognized, wonderful master of each tradition. If they say it's the same, well, that's good news. So we have, for instance, the third Karmapa, who was the holder of the Kagyu teachings. He also became a Nyingmapa Terma, master of the Dzogchen teachings. And so he could say in the Mahamudra prayer that these two are exactly the same. But he was rare, the number of people who follow both traditions through to a level of amazing attainment. Very, very rare. So here we're looking at Karma Chamé, who's a Nyingmapa master and a Kagyu master. And he's going to be telling us that Mahamudra is, of course, wonderful. Dzogchen is wonderful. But Chinrezig embodies the highest of all of them as a practice. And there's no need for anything else. That's basically the message of this text, which comes through in 8 different chapters. So I hope this context isn't too kind of boring, but I'm duty-bound to do it, and we can't just jump into the text and verse 1, because I wouldn't be kind of honoring the tradition. Now, the next thing is we need to look at the qualities of the author. So who was Karma Chamé? And I've sent you one biography of him. And I say one because there are different ones and there is some confusion. So just let me get back. I've lost you again. Yes, good. Yeah, we need to go back to history again, because where the biographies say something a bit different is about his own main influences, and some say Shamarpa and some say Karmapa in the Kagyu tradition, and we have to look back at the time in which he lived, which is the 1600s. And he was born in 1613, he died in 1678. It was a time of political, military upheaval in Tibet. So we find Karma Chamé is more or less a contemporary of the 10th Karmapa. If you know anything about the Karmapa lineage, which I think some of you do, you'll know that at 10th Karmapa time is when the Mongol armies swept into central Tibet, and they wanted to place the 5th Dalai Lama as the spiritual head and also as like a king in central Tibet, which they did. They did it violently. They did it with armies, killing and destroying. And the 10th Karmapa had to run away from his monastery. What's interesting is Karmapa's monastery was Supu in Tibet. Many of you know this, which is outside of Lhasa. It's in central Tibet. So there was the Karmapa, there was Shamarpa, and the Shamarpa had become like the king of the central Tibetan area. He had a lot of, like Dalai Lama was before the Chinese came and took over Tibet, had both temporal power and spiritual authority. Spiritual authority within his own tradition, Gelugpa, but temporal power over everybody in central Tibet, and a lot of influence over the other kingdoms of Tibet, like Dege. So we know the Dalai Lama recently was like that, head of the government. So Shamarpa was like that in central Tibet. He had temporal power, and he was also main Lama in the Kagyu lineage. And the Karmapa, although Supu was his main seat, he traveled so much of his life with the Karmapa camp. And, excuse me, I'm rambling because I love history, but it's so interesting. Like if you know Nalanda University in India, not anybody could get in. You had to pass an exam, they called it, with the gatekeeper before you were let in. I don't know if they had a kind of a pass or something, but you could only get in to study in Nalanda if already you were very learned. So Karmapa's camp was like that, either very learned people or yogis who were deep into the one or another of the Kagyu practices, and thousands of them moving in a great encampment. It was called the Great Encampment, slowly across Tibet and sometimes into China to teach. So Karmapa was away for years, leading basically the homeless life with a few thousand other highly qualified scholars and meditators. So that's why the Shamarpa, who was in central Tibet, he had a lot of power. He had his own monastery there as well. And so what happened is the Mongol armies wanted to install the 5th Dalai Lama as the head, and so they took Shamarpa's power away. He has one of these hats that was given to him by the Karmapa. They buried his hat underground, so he couldn't wear it as a sign of who he was. He was chased away. Karmapa was chased away and was in exile for, I think, 20 years or so. He ended up in Yunnan, where he was supported by the king of Yunnan. So this is the time into which Karma Chamé was born. Now you'll see in his biography, and I won't go through all of it, but he was born in eastern Tibet, Dokam areas in eastern Tibet, and his father was a Nimapa Lama and a Nimapa Mahasiddha, and his mother was, they say, a Dakini. When he was born, at the time of his birth, the father gave him empowerment, and his father, as he grew up, taught him to read and write. He was training him to be a future Lama in the Nimapa system, so he learned how to perform a Lama's ceremonies, give empowerments, memorize texts. And he also learned how to meditate. And then he went to study with a yogi, a very deeply realized yogi called Pravashara. And he received the Nimapa pointing out from that teacher. And then after that pointing out, he went to wander. So he was a wandering yogi, spending all of his days and nights in practice. And he attained many signs of realization. And then at one point, he received the first transmission about Avalokiteshvara, Chenrezig, from somebody called Namjo. After that, he got to the age of 19, and he went to Supu, and there he became a monk, because he'd been wandering as a lay yogi, and he took refuge, novice ordination, full ordination. And then from there he went off to a monastery of the Sumang tradition. Sumang is where the Trungpa Rinpoches were. So he went there, and that's where he used his name Karma Chamé. And then at one point, the Karmapa and Shamapa, and I don't know which other spiritual son, maybe Taisitupa, came to Zumong, where he was. And so the Karma Chamé received from the Karmapa then the Kaju transmission, empowerments transmission, Kaju pointing out, among which there is what in here is called co-emergent Mahamudra. So then for a year and a half, he accompanied the Karmapa and was in retreat and practice. He became very well known because he had very powerful realization. He was a Mahasiddha, but also he studied a lot, and he became a Khenpo, master of Dharma, before a gathering of 12,000 monks. That's a lot. So they have this, they still do in Tibet, have big gatherings of monks. And this one was 12,000 of the Karmapa's camp. And so then he went into a 13-year retreat. And near the end of the retreat, he recognized a reincarnation called Mingyur Dorji, who was a reincarnation of Guru Rinpoche's, one of Guru Rinpoche's disciples. So I've been reading from the text I sent you. Please read it all and get more of the details, and then read the second bit, which is about Mingyur Rinpoche, not the Mingyur Rinpoche who's around now. He's a different Mingyur. Mingyur just means changeless. There are a few Mingyur Rinpoches around. And so But this Mingyur Rinpoche, the Karma Chamé recognized, became very big in Tibetan Buddhism because he gave us the Dzogchen, the Amitabha teachings, received directly from Amitabha when he was a child. And he had many visions. If some of you do the Karmapakshi practice in the Kagyu tradition, he gave us that sadhana. And so he's in the Tonkas. He was just an amazing child, first recognized by Karma Chamé, and then Karma Chamé put the child's visions into practice. So what we do now for prayers, rebirth in Dzogchen, and the whole cycle of teachings related to Dzogchen, Amitabha's Pure Land, they come from Mingyur Teton, Mingyur Rinpoche. Karma Chamé put them into practice form, and then became a student. As the boy grew up, he became his student because he was, both of them, Karma Chamé and this student, know how to express this. Yeah, this is a big topic, so it's serious, it's important. Let's take a moment. Let's take a breath amongst all this history and context. There's two sorts of Dharma. There's bottom-up Dharma and there's top-down Dharma, right? Bottom-up Dharma makes sense to everybody. It's like grassroots. It's very much embodied in the Theravada tradition and the Shravaka tradition, and it just tells you how much suffering there is and why there's suffering because of karma, and that there is liberation, and the way to liberation is through mindfulness and meditation and so on. And we can all start to meditate. We can all start to practice mindfulness. It's not inaccessible. It's about us, our lives, and what we can do about it. It's, how can you say, approachable, shareable. So that's kind of what I would call bottom-up Dharma, where gradually through that you rise and you rise, and you become more liberated, more peaceful, wiser. Qualities start to emerge. As opposed to that, you've got top-down Buddhism, and I sort of want to share with you the enthusiasm and the frustration that I've seen in my teachers, because they are there. They're in this, what we've studied as Buddha nature. They're in the light, what's called the clear light, or what's called Rigpa, the intelligent clarity. Whatever it is, they're there. And they realize we've all got it. And no matter how much you teach, you can't just share it. You hammer hard on people's door, hello, hello, impermanence, shunyata, adoha, a song, milarepa, and you're trying hard to get the message in because it's so wonderful. You're all really Buddha. It's right there. And then above everybody's heads, what they see is Chinresik, is Guru Rinpoche, is Tara. Not some mental exercise where people have to visualize that. They're there. They're there all the time, like we say in the prayer at the beginning. Ever present above my head on lotus and moonseed. And so this enthusiasm, where if only they could break this shell of our ignorance, whereby they can only drip feed, trickle feed something in, and hope that when they've given a ceremony or given a teaching, the people come out of it a bit better. So it's an incredible frustration. It's an incredible act of forbearance and patience that they just keep coming along and teaching and giving refuge and giving instructions about loving all beings like your mother. And I've seen that. So Karma Chamé and Tertön Mingyur Rinpoche were like two beautiful beams of sunlight from the highest space that appeared in our world to give us this treasure of a teaching. And I just wish, if I can sort of share a bit of the frustration and enthusiasm of my teachers, I just wish this wasn't another Ken course with Ken explaining another text, like if you go to university or college and you study this, you study that. I just wish somehow this light that they brought into the world through these teachings could break through. Akon Rinpoche used to say sometimes, maybe one verse is all you need for your whole life. Maybe some simple teaching is just going to do it for you. And so we have all these teachings in the hope that somehow something will connect with you and work for you. And so sometimes it might be the Buddha nature teachings, it might be the six paramita teachings, it might be something very simple. It might be a line from a song of Milarepa. So if when we go through this course, maybe just one idea or one verse will really connect with you, that's enough, that's good. And that's my hope. But anyway, in Karma Chamé's life, we see somebody who first mastered the Nyingma teachings, Dzogchen, then mastered the Kaju teachings under Shamarpa and Karmapa, then devoted himself to Chenrezig practice, and who actually was a very prolific teacher, but in a strange way. Although there are more than 100 texts attributed to him, and some of them translated these days into what are called Mountain Dharma books, I think Kamatriana in the USA. They translated some of his books. He never sat down to write anything. All of these teachings were what he gave to people on request, and that he wrote down for them afterwards, or they wrote down, and that were gathered after he died. And there isn't a complete works of him because it's only whatever could be recovered from all these different people. So he lived in retreat. And that's why he's wonderful. He's like Milarepa, he's like later, 200 years after him, Patrul Rinpoche. And a few great Tibetan masters who were not in the monastic system. They lived in solitude, and yet they put into Tibetan Buddhism the most wonderful input, so clear and so to the point. And I've said in other courses, but I'll say it again, people leave the world to become monks and nuns. But then in Vajrayana, then very often you leave the monastery because it's a sort of a samsara light in its own way. There are people, power trips, systems. There's a lot of security. You've got your food every day. You've got the regular prayers. So some yogis leave the monastic system, which is like the safety of home, and they go off to meditate in solitude, where they are 24/7 with their guru and 24/7 practicing. And so this was a great Indian tradition, and we have a few shining lights in the history of Tibet, like Milarepa, like Chamé Rinpoche, like Patrul Rinpoche later, who give us this crystal clear Dharma. They put their finger right on the heart of the matter. So Karma Chamé, absolutely wonderful, prolific teacher on so many different practices, but mainly here showing Chinrezig practice. So let's start. Let's start with a traditional journey through the text. And I hope the introduction wasn't too boring. For me, it is useful. We need to know. So the text was written in Tibetan, and it starts with the title, which is Pakpa Tuji Chempoi, Martri Chagzok Zungjuki Nyamlen Nimpo Dupa. So at the end it says Nimpo Dupa, which means this is the very essential point, all gathered in one place, the essential teachings all put together. Ningpo means heart essence, Dupa means gathered together. And what's being gathered together is showing how Mahamudra and Dzogchen lead to one and the same thing. They come from one and the same source, Buddha nature, and they lead to one and the same result, recognition, full recognition of Buddha nature. So it's the combined essence showing how Mahamudra and Dzogchen become the same. And it's a text called a martri. Ma means red, or in red, and tri means written in red. And so when I was translating this, I pushed it a little bit. And so I called it, red, blood. I called it a lifeblood text to give the impression that it really captures the very essence. And at first, Akon Rinpoche looked a bit shocked at the translation. And then he did that sometimes. He came back the next day and he said, I didn't like it at first, but it's a good idea. So this word martri in the title, red writing, means it's so vital. I think vital is the word. You can't afford to miss this. And out of all the Buddha's teachings, this is what you've got to keep in mind. So a martri, it's the most vital bit. And it's about, in the first bit says, Pakpa Tuji Chempo, and that means Arya, Chinrezig, literally Mahakarunika, the great compassionate one. And then there's a subtitle which probably was added later, and it says the finest teachings of the Neido Kagyu. So the Kagyu lineage, we have 4 earlier schools, or 4 major schools they're often called, and then the 8 sub-branches. But then in the development of those Kagyu teachings, all originally from Gampopa, over the years and through different monasteries in Tibet, Karma Chamé becomes the first, so the founder of the Neido Kagyu, and some of my teachers in the 1990s, and then in Tibet in 2000, were from Neido Kagyu, very wonderful teachers. Khenpoken, for instance, and Choru Tuku, and people like this, who mainly we learned Tibetan medicine from, but they were from Neido Kagyu tradition. So it's nice to have a connection with that. And then the Karma Chamé lineage was the lineage of teachers for Akon Rinpoche's own family, going back in the centuries. So there's a definite kind of, how can you say, family link, let's say. So that's the title. In the title, in a longer explanation, we talk about Mahakarunika, and Chinrezig. So I should say at least a little bit. Where do we find out about Chinrezig? Some of the earliest references come, for instance, in the Lotus Sutra, chapter 25, and then there's probably the very earliest is called a Karanda Vyuha Sutra. That's where we hear about Chinrezig and Chinrezig's mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. And then about Chinrezig and Dewa Chen, we find something in the Amitabha Sutra, Pure Land Sutras. So there are various ones of those, Amitabha Sutra. But more in the Amitayus. There's a longer Amitayus Sutra, a shorter Amitayus Sutra. And there we hear about Chinrezig and how Chinrezig is a Buddha manifest as a 10th level bodhisattva to help beings. And how, for instance, in Tibet, then some of the great teachers like the Dalai Lamas and the Karmapas are seen as the light of compassion coming into Tibet through these lineage holders and their lineages. And then you'll find various versions of the Buddha talking about the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra. In one text, I think that's the one from the Lotus Sutra, that's referred to, Buddha Shakyamuni says when he's giving the teaching, I could tell you the number of all the snowflakes that will ever fall in our world. I could tell you the number of all the blades of grass in this world, but I could never tell you the greatness of the benefit of even reciting one Om Mani Padme Hum mantra. There's another sutra where he says, he's talking about there's a storehouse of sesame grains. Sesame grains are very tiny. And he says, I could tell you exactly how many sesame grains in that storehouse. And were it were to rain for 7 eons, not just on this world, but our whole related cosmic system of 1 billion worlds, 1 billion planets related to ours, were it to rain for so many cosmic eons, I could tell you exactly how many raindrops would fall. That's quantifiable. But I could never tell you the benefits of reciting or of hearing one Om Mani Padme Hum. So we find in the sutras that although there are so many dharanis given in the basic Buddhist teachings, they're sort of mantras, and we find them in the Theravada teachings as well. Dharanis they're called. And then mantras in Vajrayana practices. Of all of those dharanis and mantras, Om Mani Padme Hum is not just the essence of them all, but it's the umbrella that contains them all. This is what it says in the sutras. It is very profound. It's like, for instance, if you had Karmapa's telephone number. Now, I think a lot of people I know would really like to have Karmapa's telephone number, so you could just call him up and talk with him. But you haven't got it. A handful of people do. Imagine this direct line. So this is what the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra is, and the Chinrezig practice. It is the direct line to the highest, purest state. So Chinrezig crops up in those sutras that I've mentioned. And then once the Tibetan literature starts, then there are lots of texts, not from India, but written in Tibet, starting with King Tsunsen Gampo, that are gathered together in the Manikabum, this huge collection of works about Chinrezig and Chinrezig practice. So that's the title. And then so this is a Tibetan text. So in Tibetan Dharma thinking, they're very organized. In Indian Dharma thinking, they're very, let's say, poetic. Let's not say badly organized or disorganized. Let's just say very spontaneous. And they don't put analytical structures in their texts. Tibetans do. And they are very, very fond of analytical structure. So this text will be in 8 sections. And the first one, it says the song summarizing the best teachings. So we get the verses, and it starts with a homage. Namo Maha Karuni Kaye. Namo means homage. Mahakaruna means the great compassionate one. So it's homage to the presence of the great compassionate one. The sutras, tantras, and various scriptural traditions are many and vast. However, life is short and wisdom limited, so it would be hard to cover them all. One may know a lot, but not putting it into practice would be like dying of thirst on the banks of a great lake. And it can happen that a common corpse is found in the bed of a great scholar. So sorry, I don't know if I feel very boring today. Some days I feel quite sparky and so on, but today I feel very boring, and I hope it's not, because this is a wonderful topic and it's a wonderful practice, and I just hope there could be more sparkle. But anyway, if we were to undo this text with lots of time, then it says the sutras, tantras, and various scriptural traditions are many and vast. Now, a Buddhist scholar can have a ball unpacking all of that. The sutras, the tantras, so we need to talk about the 12 sections of Dharma teaching, or the 3 baskets of Dharma, Sutra, Abhidharma, Vinaya. We'd need to talk about Buddhist texts, the Kanjur, which is everything the Buddha said, which in Tibet is contained in 100 and something volumes. The Tanjur, which are all the Shastras and the commentaries from great teachers, several hundred volumes. So if you go in the Samiling Shrine Room, all those books that are packed around the walls, they are the Tanjur and the Kanjur. It's the Buddha's teaching, and we can divide it up in different ways, sutras, tantras, or into 12 sections, or into the Tripitaka and the Tantras, and so on. So a fuller commentary would explain all of this. So we're talking about 400 Tibetan books full, right? And then it's saying, that's a lot. And you'll know if you've ever studied one of those books, like last year we spent a year of Saturdays looking at one not so long one about the Buddha nature teachings. So he's saying, that's a lot. It's a lot. Now, Karma Chamé, we're going back to the 1600s, living in solitude, sometimes visiting, teaching in monasteries, people coming to him, mainly monastics, yogis, sometimes common people, lay people, but but very often scholars. So remember, when we looked at the biography, he mastered the Nima teachings, he mastered the Kaju teachings, and then in front of all those thousands of people, he passed very well his exams as a Dharma master, as a Khenpo. So he's saying this, all of those things that you could study. I don't know if there's anybody in the whole history of Tibet who's ever studied all of them. So he's saying, however, life is short. That's very, very true. And especially your Dharma active life. By the time you've got your nose above the samsaric water and you're seeing the fresh air of Dharma, and the time you can actually understand its importance, put it into practice, and then you're dead. You only just started. You do a lot, but the more you do, the more you realize what a wonderful path and what a beginner you are, how much you don't know. So he says, life's short and our wisdom is limited. And so the next bit is a very funny understatement. He says, so it would be hard to cover all of that. Nobody's ever done it. But at the time, people are keen to understand Dharma. So when they get the chance, they study this one with that teacher and that one with that teacher. So now how can we apply this to ourselves today? You have a lot of Dharma available. These days, on YouTube, on internet, live teachings, live courses you can sign up for, pay for, so much stuff on YouTube. And you can actually go to Dharma centers, you can go to India, Nepal, and take live teachings. So what are you doing? How much benefit has there been for you with all the courses you've attended? How much went in one ear and out the other? And how much went so much in one ear but not out the other one that it got into you? And now it's into you and it's in your DNA and it's in your bones because it changed you. It woke you up. It freed you from something. Freed you from your anger, your passion, or your jealousy, a bit, or in one area. Or it made you realize what an amazing thing it is to have a mind and the potential of this mind. So when we think what has been going on, going round from teacher to teacher, from teaching to teaching, and learning this and learning that, how much real benefit was there? And will you go on attending stuff, another course, another teaching, or even from this tradition to another tradition? He's saying, because studying means you attend, you listen, you get the idea. And then you go on to something else, you attend, you listen, you get some of the idea. You get the idea, basically. Full stop, you got the idea. Ideas don't change us. They form the ground for practice. The practice changes us. Learning how to be intimate with yourself so that you can go into a quiet and controlled space and start to explore your own mind in everything it is. Your history, your emotions, your thoughts, but then the new potential that you find in quietness, in shamatha, in mindful insight, and so on. It's only in doing that you really change. We need the information. We need to study. And the more we study, the more it makes what Buddha's trying to tell us Sometimes I get the feeling that Buddha's there. He's got me by the shirt collar. He's like, Ken, wake up. Wake up, for God's sake. Or maybe not for God's sake. For Buddha's sake. Come on. They've been telling you now for 50 more years. How much has actually gone in and transformed you, given you the means for stable, reliable, and how much more helpful are you for other people now? How much more understanding, kinder, forgiving, and insightful into the karma they carry. The real warming up of the heart, the letting go of all the anxiety through hope and fear. How much has it changed you? So he said there are people who've studied and they can blah, 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 the Buddha's teaching, the ideas, very well. But when they die, it says there is on their deathbed just a common corpse. So what's he talking about there? What's an uncommon corpse? An uncommon corpse is the corpse of a meditator, someone who's practiced. And there at the time of death, because your mind, through practice, joins up with your mind essence, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, or with your guru's blessing, same thing, then an unusual death, an unusual corpse, the body stays in meditation for a day, 3 days, 5 days, and sometimes even weeks. Things happen. Usually the corpse shrinks. Not shrinks a little bit, shrinks down to about this size. And, for instance, Akon Rinpoche, he was horribly murdered. And so he was to be cremated in his home monastery, Domalakang. And his body was already shrinking. And it was shrinking so fast because he was in a state called Tukdam, which is meditation, that the Chinese authorities didn't want the word to spread, because then thousands of people would have come flocking for a miracle they didn't want. So they speeded up the whole cremation ceremony, so before lots of people could turn up. But an extraordinary death is like that. Sometimes you see pictures, the Lama's bodies come down to something, it's just a foot long, and then sometimes disappears completely. There's only clothes and fingernails and hair left. And if not, then they're sitting, and the signs of normal death, the fluids coming out and so on, doesn't happen. They're dead, no pulse. Probably no brain activity if anybody's measuring. I mean, they couldn't measure that back in Tibet, but nowadays they can. Somebody's clinically dead, but in Buddhist terms, they're not dead because they've gone through the white, the red, they've not gone through the black stage, the 3 stages of death. So that's an unusual death. This happens these days. It's not just in the past and in the literature. This really happens. So that's a sign that you've been able to integrate your everyday mind into the Guru's blessing, into Buddha nature, and that has physical manifestations, and there you can't cheat. I remember sometimes, quite ironically, Akon Rinpoche, when he heard the exaggerated CV of a Lama, he would say, well, we'll see when they die. He said, that's the only really good test, because either they die in Tukdam, in Samadhi, or it's just a common corpse like anybody else, and the body fluids come out, and it's just a not very attractive piece of meat. It's very different when somebody's in Tukdam, when they're in the deep meditation. Such a presence. You come into it, and you can say it takes your breath away. It's almost like a pointing out, because there's stillness and beauty. So anyway, that's what this first verse is talking about. It says, one may know a lot, but not putting it into practice. It says it's like dying of thirst on the banks of a great lake. So let's take the example. Great lake, beautiful water, clean water. And there you are, sitting right next to it. You're not just thirsty, you're dying of thirst. What's missing? Drinking. The water's there. And there was a Zen teacher, Kenneth Roshi, I think. She found a fantastic book title, Selling Water by the River. It's there for anybody. They can go and drink, but there you make a business out of it. So you're selling water by the river. It's a very nice Zen title. So anyway, the water's there. You're right next to it. But you're not drinking because you don't know, or you haven't realized that's what you've got to do. Got to drink. So all these Dharma teachings are there, so we apply them. The stuff about karma is so that we learn to change what we do and how we do it. That we understand karma, how it's driving other people. And so we need to let it make us wise. And if we hear about suffering and impermanence, it needs to bring compassion. If you hear about suffering, you know about the 6 realms, technically, you could give a talk about the 6 realms of samsara. But it's not broken your heart, because beings really are suffering, and there's so many more of them than us. Then it didn't get into you. We've become there's a I think it's the right word in English, inured to suffering. You just hear about it. Oh yeah, only one person died, or you don't even bother about that. Oh, 100 people died. That's serious. That's on the news then. You know, that qualifies. A bus went over a cliff. And then 1,000 people. And then it's just facts. And when one person dies, it's such a tragedy for them, for the people close to them. And Katya was saying just yesterday about people being killed in this Ukraine-Russia war. He said, everything that goes into making somebody a 20-year-old, all the education, the growing up, the food, everything, and then just destroyed. A bomb, a bullet. What a waste. What an amazing waste. And when you think about that, you know, that one person and their family, and it's a huge tragedy. Yeah, we can listen, 1,500 killed yesterday, and it's kind of a fact. So Dharma is there to wake us up to what's really happening in us, around us. It's so vivid. It's so vivid. And there's something inside us that resists. I think it's called ego or history. And so it's like our ears are only open 5%. We want to let it in as much as we can cope with the Dharma teaching. And our heart is open 1%, because it might break our heart or open our heart. And the ego doesn't like that. And so there's a huge resistance. And the strange thing is that part of the resistance of ego is that it realizes it can survive by becoming a Dharma ego. I know so much. I know so much Dharma. I know so much about the mind. Mind does this, mind does that. You become a mind blah blah expert, you can tell people about it. You know about Abhidharma, the mind's got this consciousness and feelings and perception and labeling. You can talk about it. You can become a Dharma ego. That got them. Buddha came there and the Rinpoches came there to get you out of it. And before you know it, it only took a couple of years, you've become a Dharma somebody. And you can relax now. That uncomfortable feeling at first has gone away. Study, information, your own pride of mastery of information and so on. This verse is saying, what you doing? What you doing? And then, so the next verse says, the sutra and the tantra texts and the words of the scholars and great meditators of India and Tibet all have great blessings, but they're difficult for ordinary people to grasp. They are needed for teaching in a monastic college, but for one-pointed practice, they are of little use. This text, he calls it pointing out instruction for an old lady. I'm sorry to stereotype. It's a lady, it's ageist, it's sexist, but it gives you the image which comes up so really in Tibetan Buddhism, is that in the family the mother often was the one who had more time to practice. And the traditional little Tibetan old lady with her prayer wheel going around Om Mani Padme Hum and so on. And you can put something in words so simple that person can get it 100%. This is what it means. So it means pointing out for an ordinary person, a simple person, and somebody set in their ways already. That's why it says an old lady. It's not old, stupid, it's that somebody's very set in their ways already. Harder to accept new ideas. Is more beneficial for your mind than all of the others. So it's saying there are some people, and they will need to master as much of the Buddha's teachings as they possibly can, because they have to teach them in a monastic college. Kaju monastic college, 6 years more or less of study, 2 weeks off a year, full-time study. In Gelugpa, sometimes 9 years, can be as much as 12 years. So if you're teaching, then you need to know. In the Theravada system, it was how much of the Buddha's own teaching you knew by heart. When we go to the great days back in India, the great monasteries, some rare masters knew half the Buddha's teaching by heart. And I think there's a reference to one who could quote all of the Buddha's sutras by heart. And so, there's that kind of measure, and you need to know at least, the syllabus and to be master of it if you're going to teach in a monastic college. So fair enough, then you need to study a lot, and you need to be able to cross-reference all the different things. But if you're not going to do that, if on the contrary you're going to practice, and you're going to practice, he calls it one-pointed practice. I think we might have time to come back to that before we end. Then you don't need most of that stuff that you could study, may not be of much use to your actual practice. And now from that point of view, Tibetans are curious creatures, let's say. In terms of practicing what you preach, because I've heard this from so many different teachers, I think it must be commonly shared. They say, back in India, in the early days of Tantra, there were so many Mahasiddhas, And people practiced so much because they had one practice and they did that one pointedly all their lives, and it bore fruit. They say, we Tibetans, we receive so many empowerments. When you receive an empowerment, the master puts a bumpa, it's a sort of pot, a vase, on your head. He said, we've received so many empowerments for so many different practices, we Tibetans have a bump on the front of our head. He's joking, it doesn't mean they really have a bump, but it means people, they hear, Lama, this is giving this empowerment, and now you've received transmission for this practice and that practice, and they like to do different practices. He said, that's why we didn't get so many Mahasiddhas in India. So me being a cheeky interpreter and studying with them, I want to say, well, why don't you do that then? Why don't you Tibetans do that? Not go to all the empowerments, not practice lots of different things. Just do the one thing, because you realize that's the way to go. But I've said it to one or two, but they don't look very happy about it. But so many have said this. So one pointed practice is when you have, well, now, there's actually an ideal compromise. I found it very beautiful. Within all the different tantras, there are the different, Buddha families, 5 dhyana Buddhas, 5 directions, and so on. And there's the lotus family. The lotus family is very present in our Kagyu Buddhism and elsewhere. You've got Amitabha as Dharmakaya, you've got Chenrezig, Antara mainly as Sambhogakaya and Nimanakaya manifestations, and Guru Rinpoche as mainly Nimanakaya manifestation. So with that little handful of practices, Chenrezig, Tara, Guru Rinpoche and Amitabha, you have sort of the complete set of the Padma family, Lotus family. And there you've not got tens of lots of different practices that many people have. They've got to taken a commitment, so every day they have to at least recite the mantra or a short prayer to this practice, that practice, that practice. If you've got that little set, it's very, very nice. It's very good. So then what will happen, for instance, if you've got Amitabha practice, then there's an Amitabha Mundro. For Chenrezig practice, there's Chenrezig Mundro. And so there you'll have Vajrasattva practice and a few others. But that's a very nice set. But in this verse, what he's saying is, unless you're going to be teaching in a monastic college, for one pointed practice, knowing too many different things is of little use. You need to know how to do your practice, how to cope with the obstacles when they come up, how to deepen that practice. So he says, this instruction I'm about to give is more beneficial for your mind than all of the others. So there we have to stop. It's sort of time that we stop. And now, normally when we stop, excuse me, I'll be back in a second. Let's put this on pause. Yeah, normally when we dedicate, we have our same prayer we've been using for the last years. When we did the 100 million Om Mani Padme Hums in Samiling with Lama Lacho, who was a great Manipa, a very great Chenrezig teacher. And we had a special Mani dedication, and Akon Rinpoche really liked it, and he would use it on special occasions. So I'd like us to dedicate this session with this prayer. I prostrate to the Dharmakaya, or at the end of each verse there's Om Mani Padme Hum, so you can join in with that or the whole prayer. I prostrate to the Dharmakaya, union of all the Buddhas of the three times, the one who gazes upon the six kinds of beings, Chenrezig, 11-faced and all-pervading like space, most impressive and majestic, Amitabha, Om Mani Padme Hum Hari. Through the quintessence of all dharmas in 6 syllables, may a cloud of offerings appear. May they be presented to the peerless guide, Chenrezig, and Sakyamuni, king of sages, the crowning glory of all the Sakyas, and to an ocean of Buddhas and their offspring, Bodhisattvas in the 10 directions, and to all the Kagyu Lamas. Om Mani Padme Hum Hari. May the fulfillment of the wishes of the former Buddhas and the completion of the accumulation of future Buddhas and the long life prayers of the present Buddhas all be made manifest through the 6 syllables. Om Mani Padme Hum Hari. All those who have a karmic link with me, my father and my mother, my teachers, my relatives and friends, all those who place their hopes in me and rely on me, Protector Chenrezig, please lead them all on the way and grant them your blessing that they may be reborn in Dewa Chen. Om Mani Padme Hum Hari. All those who've been my benefactors and asked me not to forget them, all the kind benefactors I promised not to forget, Protector Chenrezig, lead them on the way and grant them your blessing they may be reborn in Dewa Chen. Om Mani Padme Hum Hari. All the dead for whom lamas have been asked to say prayers, all those who passed away from this life, and of whose possessions I received a share, Protector Chenrezig, lead them on the way and grant them your blessing they may be reborn in Dewa Chen. Om Mani Padme Hum Hari. All the beings who live off the goods intended for making representations of the body, speech and mind of all the Buddhas, and those who live from the belongings of lamas or the Sangha, and from ransom obtained through selling sacred images, or from goods offered out of faith, Protector Chenrezig, lead them on the way and grant them your blessing they may be reborn in Dewa Chen. The dead I've heard about or seen with my own eyes, and all those in the 3 dimensions of conditioned existence who passed away, Protector Chenrezig, lead them on the way and grant them your blessing they may be reborn in Dewa Chen. All those who've been murdered, who died from starvation, who perished on high mountain passes, or were drowned, or those who wander in the bardo accompanied by so much sin and no virtue, Protector Chenrezig, lead them on the way and grant them your blessing they may be reborn in Dewa Chen. Om Mani Padme Hum Hari. The most kind mother cow whose milk and yogurt I consume, and all the animals whose flesh and blood I have eaten, Protector Chenrezig, lead them on the way and grant them your blessing they may be reborn in Dewa Chen. Om Mani Padme Hum Hari. All the pack animals overburdened with loads they can hardly bear, these beasts who are beaten while ridden, those that would not budge and had their noses pierced for pulling with a rope, plough animals also, Protector Chenrezig, lead them on the way and grant them your blessing they may be reborn in Dewa Chen. Om Mani Padme Hum Hari. Those who've committed the 10 unvirtuous actions, or the 5 immeasurable of no reprieve, or the 5 sins almost as great, all those with such bad karma, Protector Chinrezig, lead them on the way and grant them your blessing. They may be reborn in Dewa Chen. Those in the hells, the craving spirits, animals, jealous semi-gods, gods and men, all sentient beings in the 3 dimensions of conditioned existence. Protector Chinrezig, lead them on the way and grant them your blessing. They may be reborn in Dewa Chen. All those who live in the 4 elements of earth, water, fire and wind, whether in bodily form or formless, small or large, Protector Chinrezig, lead them on the way and grant them your blessing. They may be reborn in Dewa Chen. Om Mani Padme Huri. Rulers, monsters and citizens steeped in corruption, bad men who are shameless, deceitful and hypocritical, those with ill will in their hearts, Protector Chinrezig, lead them on the way and grant them your blessing. They may be reborn in Dewa Chen. Om Mani Padme Huri. Infinite as all the cosmic systems in the 10 directions, all beings as difficult to reckon as the unfathomed deeps, Protector Chinrezig, lead them on the way and grant them your blessing. They may be reborn in Dewa Chen. Om Mani Padme Huri. Beings who live in each province of this world, or anywhere on similar planets under their suns, Protector Chinrezig, lead them on the way and grant them your blessing. They may be reborn in Dewa Chen. Om Mani Padme Huri. 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 Thank you. That was our dedication. So now, your turn. Your turn for your comments or your questions.
Hi, Ken.
Hi, Vicky.
So this kind of ties in with my own reflections of my practice this morning, that I've been thinking for a long time about how I feel like I've maybe learned a lot of things. And when I actually look at how much I have personally changed, that really hasn't been much at all. Like, I don't feel as though I'm making any kind of real headway in reducing mind poisons or things like that. Um, and I'm curious about that because I meet other practitioners who tell me one of their motivating factors is that they can see the personal change inside themselves, like a reduction. And I've never ever seen that, and I just wondered whether you might comment on it.
Yeah, a common ailment, I think. Things vary so much from person to person because we all have such different past life karma we bring to this life. And so that when we meet up with Dharma, the impact can be dramatic, spectacular. It can be very low-key, matter of fact. And then we are the last person in the world who's able to see the changes it brings to us. And lots of Dharma teachers say so-and-so came to me, or people come to me. They say, since I've been practicing Dharma, I've got worse, even. Because they meditate, so they're starting to see their own mind. They're more aware of just what a human mind is. It's darkness, it's trickiness, and whatever it may be. So they think they're getting worse, but the teacher says they're getting better. It's just they're seeing more of the person they've always been, and that their ego's been covering up with a nice cover story one way or another to themselves, to other people. So we're the last person in the world who can really see. And then some people do change, but it depends what change is. Some things are easy to change. Some things are much harder. It's a lifetime or lifetimes of work to change. So, and then one of the most impactful teachings I ever received from Akon Rinpoche was it just, you can never compare any two people. No way. Everyone's unique. How could you compare them? There is no baseline, there is no benchmark. How can you compare with other people? They all have such a different history in this life alone, but then in past lives. So, well, back in those good old days in India when people only practiced one practice, and they did it very, very well, part of it was you don't talk about your own experiences and realization except with your teacher, because other people listen and they react in all their different ways, but it's not usually very useful, because what applied to you doesn't apply to them. They're a different story. And then out of all the things where we do not just hear of people reporting their own change, but sometimes we see people change. We see people who become much softer, for instance, and so it's really tangible. But I think we have to put them on one end of a scale, and for the other end of the scale, let's go to somebody illustrious like a Sangha, and the story of his 12 years in meditation, where he felt he didn't achieve a thing. Basically, according to the Tibetan story of a Sangha at least, his mum sent him to meditate. His mum was quite a character when you look into her story. And she sent him to 3 years meditation. He did 3 years, every day, all the sessions a day, in retreat, in a cave. And at the end he thought, I'm not made for this. I didn't change one bit. No change he could see in himself, no special experience. So he did that 4 3-year retreats. And he came out at the end. And he went in a young man and he came out in his 30s, according to that story. The best years of his life, trying to please his mum, and nothing happened. And then in that story, there's the moment he sees the wounded dog, and it brings great compassion. And then immediately he gets the whole package, 100% in one go. He's in Maitreya's Pure Land. He stays there for the next 25 years. And he said, why couldn't you do this at the beginning when he sees Maitreya? 12 years I've been meditating on you. Didn't see a thing, hear a thing, feel a thing, and now there's everything. And he said, every day, every session of the 12 years, what you was doing was getting ready for this. And in your case, it completely cleared away all the blockages, the obstacles, bit by bit. And this moment of extreme compassion for the dog brought all that work to a fruition. It's like people putting savings in the bank, penny by penny by penny, and then in a very big piggy bank. And this is the thing that smashes the China piggy, and all the cash comes out. You're like, jackpot. That's the way it happened with him. And then with other people, it's a different story. We have moments, years of seeming progress and blessings, and sometimes years of not, or each person's story is so unique. So what Karma Chamé is doing in this verse, he's pointing us in the right direction and saying, okay, you've studied all this up to now. You can't go back, you can't undo that. But from now on, look at this, and study. Ask yourself the question, is this really benefiting you? What benefit has come out of it? How will I follow up my tendency to want to go and study more, or to go to another teaching, or to go to another teacher? And in one way, the broad spectrum and getting lots of input, there's a healthy side to it. But in terms, as he says there, if you now you know what practice you want to do, and you're going to give that your all so it bears fruit, then do you need your mind basically to be pulled off that center to something else, to get distracted? And once it's something else, that brings in doubt sometimes, well, I've been doing all of this, maybe I should be doing that. It takes up time, it can sometimes bring doubt, and in the end, see, this is something that really happens when you do one practice, like he says, one pointedly, and it starts working. It's not always comfortable, because it brings us face to face with, amongst other things, the darker side of ourselves before we break through the darkness into the light that's on the other side. And very often the ego retreats from that. So then a new teacher, a different teaching, another perspective becomes very attractive. It's kind of a neat way out, because they're a Buddhist teacher and they're very nice and all of this. It's not like you've run back into samsara and you've just changed interest in your teaching. So sometimes this can be an escape mechanism when the practice is working and it's getting to an uncomfortable place. Sorry, I'm talking a lot, but this is a very good question, because it's something that touches lots and lots of people. They either think not much is changing or they're getting worse. And in fact, only a really good teacher can see, no, and they'll tell you, if you go to them, no, you're doing fine. Actually, just carry on like this, be patient, and let it work. But I'm your reference, because I'm the teacher you come to, and I think you're doing very, very well. And Taisittupa says, do your best. No one can do more than their best. And we do that. And we don't expect anything. We remember a Sangha. But here, just bringing it back to the verses we studied today, it's a whole questioning of how much knowledge is needed before you have a firm base for practice. And to carry on answering your question, because there's something that's relevant here, this is a question that Dakon Rinpoche asked directly to the 16th Karmapa, and then also to the first Kalu Rinpoche, and to Dilgo Chensi Rinpoche, and the really great teachers he met. He says, look, I've got this center, the first time biggest Dharma center, Tibetan Dharma center in the West. What is it essential for somebody to know if they're going to practice? So in our Kagyu tradition, they all said the same thing. They said you need to know the Buddha nature teachings, the text we did last year, Mahayana Uttara Tantra Shastra, and then in the Kagyu tradition, Gampopa's precious ornament of precious liberation, because there you've got the Dharma basics. And if somebody's mastered those two, in Kalu Rinpoche said, then they can go into retreat and they'll have all the knowledge they need when they learn. When they learn the methods and the practice, and it brings up questions in their mind, they're informed, they've got the answers. And then there's a third text, once you've done at least one long retreat, which then describes chakras, channels, inner energy work. And that's the profound inner meaning of the ninth Karmapa. So those three texts would be the minimum you'd need to know in the Kagyu tradition, but you need to really know them. Not to have read them, not just to have attended courses, but that information has been digested and become you. But then that's it. You wouldn't need any more. If you wanted to live a life of traditional 3-year retreat, Chinrezig retreat, or whatever. You need that much knowledge first. Buddha nature and the general teachings of Mahayana Dharma. You need those. Thanks for
Thank,
the question. Yeah.
thank you. It's so helpful. I was reflecting on Thursday with a Dharma group about, how we often see people who can do things really, really easily,
Mm?
and and how sometimes they're held up as examples rather than looking at people like a Sangha who just had to plod and keep trying and trying and trying. And
Yeah,
so thanks for putting those experiences on a spectrum so that everyone can belong.
yeah, and they do. They do. I mean, when they talk about Milarepa, for us, he's the most wonderful example of enlightenment in one lifetime. But when they categorize him, they say there are two types of individual, the sharp, which means the bright ones, and the dull ones. Milarepa was in the dull category, which is why he needed 12 years hard work on, not even on a cushion, on rocks, because he was dull. Other people, because of their past lives, their past connection, it can just be meeting a teacher that awakens all of that. It can happen in a few seconds. And even if they've not got all the teachings and all the Dharma information, so they're a bit surprised, something wonderful happens when they meet the teacher. Then the teacher tells them what to study, what to practice, to fill up the gaps. But the connection is there from the beginning. And so many people have told me this at last. This has been brewing all my lifetime, but now at least I've found it. I've come home. I've come home to Dharma, I've come home to my teacher. And it's a marvelous kind of, it's a marvelous feeling. I made it. got so far, at least. So that, and it comes through in so many different ways, and people are very talkative in Dharma centers. They like to tell you their experience, they like to tell you their dreams. Some people have very illustrious dreams, very colourful, Dharma-filled. And last night they met this Rinpoche, and the night before that they were in Pure Land somewhere, And other people think, bugger, I don't have a dream. I don't have it, not even had one in my whole life. Well, then they say, I've been doing this, I've been doing that practice, and it's been very hard, but I've broken through, and I've seen this, and I'm having a breakthrough. It's just breaking me, whatever. So you cannot compare people. And then sometimes the ones who at first seem blessed because they've got a lot of past life. Baksha is called in Tibetan, a lot of credit, a lot of capital from their past lives. But then it can make them lazy in this life because they feel they've belonged from the beginning. They've come home, they've met the teacher's seen this is somebody with a rich past. And then they become lazy, arrogant, they don't study, they don't practice. So what can be a blessing then can be for them an obstacle. Sorry, I can talk endlessly. I need to see if anybody else wants to say something.
Then just to say, I can very much relate to that question. And one of the metaphors I found was really helpful was, I think it was Rob Nairn said once, it's like a desert plant, and they spend years and years and years just growing roots underground, and you don't see anything much on the top. And then after years and years of this, it will blossom, and there'll be this amazing sort of desert flower. But for all that time, you just feel like nothing's happening. You can't see anything. You've got some, what looks like a half-dead little plant on the top of the, on the surface of the desert until it comes together. So I can't say I'm doomed yet, but that metaphor sort of helps me to keep going. Don't know if that's helpful for anyone else, but I found that useful.
You can't turn it, and that's why it's good to have a teacher, because then if the teacher's good enough, they can their opinion's worth gold. It's wonderful. They can see whether you are getting lazier or you're missing the point, or whether you are not getting what for you are visible results, but you actually are doing well. I remember him once, Akon Rinpoche, whispering to me about somebody who was working on Samaning building site when we were building the temple. He said he won't see the benefits in this life, but what that person's doing now, the rewards in the next life will be phenomenal. And so, and when we take, or we're coming to it, and later on in this text it talks about the precious human existence. But when we do study it, then there are 8 freedoms and there are 10 blessings or special qualities, but the 3 types of faith. So we've got 21 qualities define a precious human existence. The last 3 are the 3 types of faith. And the second one is very much believing in yourself, believing in the process, sticking with it through tough times, easy times. But that's what we mean by taking refuge. You've placed your trust in the teachings, and sometimes they deliver lots of goodies, and sometimes it's tough. And sometimes you can feel you're getting worse or go through dark years according to, that's all because of karma and environmental factors. So the teacher that we can be in dialogue with, very, very important.
Ken, I don't know if there's time or if this is a really brief question, but I'm interested in the difference between the mantra with the word Hri at the end and without the word. What is the significance of the syllable Hri?
Hri is it's like all the Om Mani Padme Hum put into one, right? So it's the essence mantra or sound. So when we learn the Chenrezig practice, it's very much to do with the 6 realms, the 6 paramitas, and each Om, Ma, Ne, Pe, Me, Hum, each of the 6 syllables is related to one of the 6 realms of beings, to one of the 6 paramitas, to our main emotions, and so on. So Om Mani Padme Hum is working through the whole panorama of existence out there and inside ourselves. And it's quite specific, if you're thinking about whatever it is, ghosts, or you're thinking about jealous gods, and then jealousy in the human world and people who live like ghosts and so on in the human realm, and in your own psyche, the ghost bit of you and the jealous god that's inside you. It's quite specific. So Hri puts it all into one. And then also in different traditions, like Gelugpa, Kajupa, and so on, some tend to say the Hri, and others to say the 6 mantras, but to keep the Hri kind of secret, and at the same time always there, invisibly. So the Hri is giving rise to Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum is like the source. And the reason is that Hri came into the mantra system because it's short for Hridaya. Hridaya in Sanskrit means the very heart of the heart, the essence of the essence. So Hri is Buddha nature. It's the heart of everything and everyone. It's the essence of everything, from which all of the mantras and all of the compassion and all of the wisdom of the 6 paramitas comes out of our pure nature, the innate purity of mind that's there right now. So Hri is that, and then it gives rise to the Om Mani Padme Hum. So there's different traditions where people will say it out loud or not. most of the lamas I know who've taught me, they do Om Mani Padme Hum 3. They include the 3. But both are good. They're both perfect.
Thank you. What a beautiful response.
Oh, good. Okay, well, next week is the first Saturday of the month, and that's our Tonglen Saturday. So we come back to these teachings in 2 weeks' time, and we'll pick up with the verses. So we've done the dedication. Please have a good fortnight, or maybe see you next week. Bye for now. Take good care.
So very much, Ken.
Bye-bye, Ken. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, everyone. You're welcome.